And we're live.
Hey, hi everyone. Thanks for joining us again. We're recording this webinar, so we're just going to start right from the top again. This is a webinar about COVID-19 and public transit, and thanks so much for joining. My name is Shelagh Pizey-Allen. I'm the director of TTCriders, and ridership group of transit riders here in Toronto. I'll be moderating the panel, and I'm really thrilled to be joined by 5 brilliant speakers: Desmond, author of The Skin We're In; Carlos Santos, president of ATU Local 113; Jamaal Myers of Scarborough Transit Action; Kandeel Imran, who's a student at University of Toronto Scarborough campus; and James Hutt of the LEAP. And thanks so much to the LEAP for co-hosting this event. We wanted to get people together to talk about what public transit agencies need to be doing right now to keep transit riders and transit workers safe, because public health officials are urging everyone to stay home if they can to stop the spread of COVID-19, but workers in essential services are still using transit to get to work. We know that people are still using transit to get groceries, to access medical services, and of course transit workers are keeping us all moving right now, and thank you to all of them. We're going to talk first about the pandemic and responses to it and some of the gaps. Then we're going to talk about context, the transit issues that we faced before the pandemic and how it's made some of them more apparent. And then finally, we'll talk about the future and what we think transit will look like after this pandemic has run its course, but more importantly, what we want it to look like and how we can get there. So I just wanted to give a disclaimer that nobody on this panel is a public health expert. We will be talking about a lot of examples specific to Toronto, but hopefully you'll find some of this relevant to you wherever you're watching from. And on that note about place, I just wanted to acknowledge that here where I'm recording in Toronto, we're on Indigenous land. This is the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. And we just wanted to acknowledge that crises do not affect us all equally. And in fact, they show us, that they highlight the inequalities that already exist. We're going to be talking about public transit today, but the gaps from addressing the gaps in government's responses to keeping transit riders and workers safe, but we know that there are many other gaps. And we all have a role to play to make sure that no one gets left behind in the response to this crisis. We've disabled the chat, but we will be posting links afterwards on Facebook and on Twitter about some of the organizations and calls to action that address gaps in the government response. And feel free to share them with us. If you have any questions, you can reach us at info@ttcriders.ca. So let's get our discussion started and talk about first how the pandemic is affecting riders and workers. We're going to start with Jamaal Myers, who is a lawyer, a Scarborough Transit Action activist, and a proud Scarborough resident. He volunteers with several community organizations, including directorships with the Scarborough Business Association and Taibu Community Health Centre in Malvern. So Jamaal, can you start by telling us about what some of the issues that Scarborough Transit users are facing right now?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Sheila, and thanks for having me on the panel today. So like you said, I'm a Scarborough resident, and I live at 401 in Nielsen, and I work downtown Monday to Friday. So on a typical weekday, I have to take the 133 Nielsen bus to get to the Scarborough Town Centre. I have to take the Scarborough Town Centre to Kennedy, and from Kennedy to Yonge, and then I have to do the reverse when I go home. I haven't used the TTC, and the last time I used the TTC was last Friday. And the first thing I immediately noticed when I got on the bus that morning was that the drivers were using protective shields. And at least in Scarborough, that's very rare. Rarely do you see the drivers using protective shields. The second thing I noticed when I got on was that the bus was empty. There were about 3 people on the bus, and usually that bus is packed. I can't get a seat. And finally, when I sat down, I noticed immediately that I just felt unsafe. I didn't want to touch anything, and I didn't want to be near anyone. And I'm sure everyone on that bus was feeling the same way. As you probably know, TTC ridership has declined about 70% since the pandemic, and about 70% overall and 80% on the subways. However, on the buses, ridership has only declined about 62%, and the TTC is operating its bus system at about 80 to 85% capacity. So a lot of the overcrowding that we're hearing right now on the TTC is actually happening on the buses. And for Scarborough residents, that's how most of us access the TTC. The people that are still forced to use the buses, particularly those in Scarborough, are mostly essential workers. So they're the TTC drivers, the grocery store clerks, the pharmacists, cleaning staff, healthcare workers, or they're people that need to pick up their groceries or pick up groceries for someone else, or they're people that need to get a medical appointment. I can't imagine any of these people right now that are using the TTC feel safe due to the overcrowding. I'm sure a lot of these people, in addition to feeling unsafe because they don't want to get sick, are worried about their finances just because they themselves are now unemployed, or a family member is unemployed, or they've had their hours cut. And the TTC should really look at whether or not it's a good idea to keep enforcing fares, which put transit users at risk and put the fare enforcement officers at risk. We don't understand at Scarborough Transit Action why it's so hard to get a firm commitment from the TTC that so long as the pandemic is continuing, the TTC won't enforce fare inspections. Many of the people using the TTC right now are struggling financially because of COVID-19, and the least the city can do is step up to help cushion the economic blow. The federal and provincial governments have done it, and I think it's time the city do the same. And one of the ways we at Scarborough Transit would like to see this is for the city to make transit free for the endurance of the pandemic. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Jamaal. Next, we're going to speak with Carlos Santos. Carlos is the president of the Amalgamated Transit Union, Local 113, which represents nearly 12,000 transit workers in the GTA, including operators and maintenance workers at the Toronto Transit Commission. And we know that the COVID-19 pandemic has already taken a deadly toll on transit workers. Just a few days ago, an ATU member in the US passed away tragically. So we want to ask Carlos, what's going on the ground? What are the health and safety issues affecting transit workers right now?
Hi, Sheila. I just want to say thank you for having me on the panel. I think the last or the most pressing issue has been the social distancing. There's still been, like what you've mentioned, there's been some overcrowded buses. We need to, I urge everyone to practice safe social distancing. I'm talking to passengers. I'm also talking to operators out there. If you feel that your vehicle is starting to get to the point where you don't feel it's safe, notify transit control and tell them, listen, my vehicle is starting to get to that point where social distancing is not being followed. I'm going to have to bypass the next stop. But that's really what we should be doing. It should be the passengers as well as all our personnel to pay attention to that social distancing. And I understand we're all going through a lot of stress. We're all doing the best we can. At the end of the day, when I come home, I have an 8-year-old and I have a wife that's scared. Did you get it today? Because I've been riding the system myself. I've been going to work every day. We're all feeling the same pain. I think we all have to work together to get through this. I think we have to show humanity that we're working together to get people where they have to be. If it wasn't for us, we wouldn't have the frontline workers like the nurses and the grocery clerks and everyone that's getting to their jobs. They would not be able to get there. So again, I want to thank my members. I understand that they're scared. Some of the things that we've gotten for our members since this whole pandemic started, and I know I've been pushing this since first week of March, was the masks. They now allow our members to get masks. We're working on actually getting masks for our members. I know there's a PPE shortage. We've also got them to load through the rear door. We've got them. They've asked to not touch the fare box. They're not touching the fare box. We've got them bury. We've got some like a tape in the back to block off the driver. They've allowed now to not have people directly sitting right behind us. So it's a step in the right direction. They're cleaning more work locations. One of the big concern is we've had three people at the TTC. We've had three members that have been COVID-19 positive. The main concern is once they find out is our members go into panic, and rightfully so. They have every right to be panicked because this is a pandemic, and it's still it's still something that we're learning. If you listen to Toronto Public Health every day, they're giving advice, but they're still learning. There is evidence, or it's starting to come out that there is an aerosol, or there is the potential that this is airborne as well. So that's another concern. So when our members are finding out that people at that location are getting it, they're really concerned and they're worried. They're trying to figure out, did they talk to the member? Were they close to the member? Where were they that day? So it is creating a big panic, not just in the city of Toronto. It's creating a big panic for our members too. And again, I commend our members. Our members are doing the best that they can. And I do feel for the members and their family, and I'm grateful that we have the staff that we do. Again, we've also recommended, we have an upholstery department. I've offered to the mayor, I've offered to Rick Leary, maybe we can turn that upholstery department into a temporary location that makes masks or gowns to help out healthcare workers. We all have to work together. I've offered to maybe load up some buses with food or cans so we can deliver it to food shelters. Like, we all have to work together to get through this. And at the end of the day, we're all looking like heroes, everyone.
Thanks, Carlos.
No problem.
You talked about, what you've already won for your members: rear door boarding, the ability to wear masks. Buses are no longer accepting cash fares. Can you talk about any measures that the TTC is not doing that you would like to see them do to protect worker safety?
I do think that they should be cleaning a lot more. I don't know if they're just don't have the staff. I do want more cleaning, and I do want them practicing having someone at the divisions to try and make sure that the social distancing is followed. Maybe we can have supervisors, show up at stations that are potentially overcrowded and have them ask members or passengers to separate better. And I think we're all going to play a role in the social distancing. The TTC has been working with us. We're working with them to get everything that we've asked for. If people are asking for more things, please feel free. Call me, call your board member, call your steward, because I don't know if I'm not told what our members are asking, then I can't ask for it. So I'm urging our members to promote health and safety and make sure that you follow that social distancing.
Thanks, Carlos. And thank you to all the transit workers who are out there keeping the system moving right now. I wanted to speak next to Desmond Cole. Desmond is a freelance journalist and activist in Toronto, and recently he's released an amazing book called The Skin We're In, and we'll post a link to that once we post this recording. So just wanted to ask you about what your concerns are about the response to COVID-19 on public transit, or even any other public services.
Thanks, Sheila, and thanks to everybody for participating this afternoon. My biggest concern in the last couple of weeks since we've been dealing with this outbreak is the unwillingness of the City of Toronto through the TTC Commission to make transit free. We're seeing free transit across the country in places from Halifax to Hamilton to Peterborough, Durham region, Mississauga Transit. They all have made transit free. Montreal. in some cases, parts of the system are free, and in some cases, it's all free. And with the incredible economic stress and hardship that people are under right now, there's no excuse for Toronto to continue trying to charge some for transit, when really the reality is we had transit inspectors still roaming the system a couple of weeks ago, intimidating and approaching people, which is not safe for anyone. And we have to talk, and I know we will talk more about what we want to see in the future, but for right now, I just think transit needs to be made free. And I would really like to emphasize that that has to include wheel-trans. People who are living with disabilities in the city of Toronto are stretched all the time on an ongoing basis, and the need to continue going for appointments for people, for grocery shopping, for those who can still continue to do so. It's just adding a consistent hardship for people to have to think money for transit or money for food. You know, these are not the kinds of choices that are fair for people to have to make right now. And so we need to continue calling on John Tory, the mayor of Toronto, and all of the members of the commission to immediately make transit free. We know it's in their capacity to do so, and to include wheel-trans in that equation. I will only add, I think, for the moment right now, as far as like the current situation that we're facing, that it's obviously, I know we're going to talk about this, it's exacerbating a lot of things that already existed. So it's already hard for people, for example, who are staying in shelters or who are using community programs to travel, and they rely on things like tokens. So going back to Jamaal's point about the busing in Scarborough, if you rely on tokens, for example, or cash fare, well, now the TTC has said it doesn't accept cash fare on buses, but it's still expecting you to pay. So this is just making a complex situation for people who are already relying on the bus system. And they're saying, well, you can go to a TTC station to get your tickets, but if you don't live near a TTC station, that's not really an option for you. I would also really like to build on what was said by Carlos, just in terms of the TTC membership is having a more successful time than the public at large at getting listened to and heard right now. Unfortunately, our city is dividing the safety on the one hand of TTC employees between that and the safety of the riders, as if they're not the same thing. Everyone's collective safety at this time is equal and is equally paramount. And so you can't say we're going to put in protective measures for our workers, but not think about the riders. So I think I'll leave it there for right now.
Thanks so much, Desmond. We want to talk to Kandeel Imran next. Kandeel is a student at the University of Toronto Scarborough, where she is the elected student rep for the Department of Human Geography. And she is also a fellow with the Muslim Youth Fellowship and will be an undergraduate research fellow with the University of Toronto School of Cities. So Kandeel, can you tell us about what your top concerns are right now during the pandemic on transit?
Yeah, sure. So hi, everyone. I just, like as a student at the University of Toronto Scarborough, I echo a lot of the sentiments that Jamaal has made about, you know, transit in Scarborough being a priority. And I really am just thinking about not just the students who are still, you know, we're still all in school, whether it be through online or not. But we're also, a lot of us are working part-time jobs still, right? As, you know, Starbucks baristas, a lot of my friends are, or at Tim Hortons, and or some folks' parents are also essential workers. So people are still using transit, and really, what I really have to think about is the overcrowding that's still on the bus routes in Scarborough and in Toronto, in the region, because it's just showing that we weren't ready for this pandemic, and that bus routes that it's been a fact, and it's been known that bus routes service so many people in Scarborough. and that we needed more service. And now we're seeing that, hey, I guess we do need more service, because now there's this entire pandemic where we have to be socially distant. Despite so many people staying home, there's bus routes that are still crowded. Also, I really echo a lot of the sentiments that Jamaal and Desmond made about fare-free transit, because really, like, during a pandemic, when everyone is thinking about all these issues they're facing, you know, like so many people are being laid off, why not fare-free when so many cities are doing it? And, you know, fare inspectors are still on duty. I'm not sure how essential of a job that is, really, because they're being told that they're educating riders on proof of payment rather than you know, charging fines. But a lot of educators have been laid off, so I really do question how essential of a service that is. Yeah, so really, like, what I think about more bus service is something we've been asking for a long time. And as well, the weather fare inspectors are an essential service, because after this all plays out, after the whole pandemic, I don't want the needle to, you know, stay in the same place. I want it to move forward. I want to see these changes, because we're seeing all of these things play out. For example, Presto only as an option for fare. Does that work for everyone? It likely doesn't, because a lot of people can't access Presto with now that Shoppers is going to be the only retailer, now that tokens are being phased out, and that and that people who are more vulnerable to and people who need to be working right now are people who can't afford to stay home. They also can't afford Presto. So I want the needle to move forward towards fare-free transit, but also I want to see more things happening right now as well. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Kandeel. The last speaker we're going to hear from on this question is James Hutt. He is the Senior Manager of Programming at the LEAP, and he is most passionate about connecting labor and climate justice. He has led advocacy for a number of unions and nonprofits. So James, you know, the LEAP has bigger concerns than just transit. I'd invite you to speak about transit, but you know, any other concerns that your organization has during the pandemic.
Sure. Thank you for having me. I want to add to a lot of the brilliant points the others have made so far. I mean, for us, the LEAP, what we're really concerned about is that working people are the ones suffering from and paying for this crisis. And we see that in the responses from various levels of government, not just in transit, but across the board, right? We're seeing mass unemployment. It could get up to about 15% over the summer, and just huge attacks on the working class. And the response of the government has been, it looks good, but until you really dive into the details, right? We're talking about a government giving $2,000 a month for 4 months for people who've been lost income, lost their jobs, but it actually doesn't apply to everybody. It's a very small group of people who can actually get it. You have to have made at least $5,000 in the past year or in the last 12 months. And so that leaves out a lot of people who are homeless, living in shelters, migrant workers, and things like that. And if you do the numbers, that 2,000 is actually less than minimum wage, right? So minimum wage at 40 hours a week is about $22.40. So they're actually giving you less than minimum wage. And what we know that in Toronto, the average price of an apartment is $2,300. So how are working people supposed to cope with this? And if we look at it in terms of what they're doing for employers, the government's giving a 75% wage subsidy to businesses, but that doesn't come with any guarantee that businesses just aren't going to lay off employees. So there's not actually that much to protect working people. And if we think about that in terms of transit, you know, transit mediates our existence in the city, how we experience it, if and how we can get groceries or to the doctor or the hospital. And a lot of people absolutely depend on transit. And what we're seeing is that a system that's been under attack for decades is now struggling under a crisis. And what we're calling for at the LEAP is a lot of things that Carlos and others have mentioned. First and foremost is fare-free transit. we shouldn't be paying for transit, period. Not in a pandemic, not ever. It should be a right to actually enjoy and live a full life in our cities. And nowhere is that more important right now. And with that, we actually have to start funding transit appropriately. So I think we look at the last couple of decades and see that transit has been chronically underfunded. In fact, the federal government only really funds capital costs. They don't actually fund a lot of the operational costs of transit systems. So we see this continual downgrade of services, continual cuts that riders and workers have to bear out. So what we're calling for is protective gear for workers, we're calling for free transit, we're calling for more regular service to actually enable that social distancing, and then we're calling for more dedicated operational funding for transit, because this is how we're actually going to survive the crisis. How many working people can continue to live, to go to the hospital, to get groceries, and to build in community.
Thanks, James. Before we move on to talking about some of the context, and I think many of you have touched on it already, I just wanted to highlight one other piece of the current pandemic that we haven't yet touched on, and that's that not every worker in the TTC has the same protections. So, you know, many workers are unionized, many of them through ATU 113, but some people are temp agency workers. Some people are contracted out through taxi companies, and these people do not have the same protections like paid sick days. And now we're seeing what a public health emergency that really is. So, you know, pretty much all of the demands and, you know, points that people have made, plus this piece around protections for all workers, are outlined in an open letter that's on our website that you can check out at TTCriders.ca. But just wanted to mention that. We're going to shift now to talk about the transit issues we were facing before the pandemic and how they've been highlighted by this crisis. And Jamaal mentioned that, you know, huge ridership drop that we've seen on the TTC, up to some systems have seen up to 90% of their ridership fall in Canadian transit systems. And obviously that's a good thing when we're trying to be socially distant, but it's highlighted how reliant our public transit systems are on fares for their operating costs. So I want to start this time with Kandeel, and you know, you've already talked about bus service in Scarborough, but I wanted to ask you to elaborate a bit more on your experience taking the TTC, and I know you commute north of Steeles as well, so you know, running transit in other municipalities, and how this crisis has highlighted some of the issues that you face.
So I guess when I think about, you know, like before the pandemic, you know, I guess like we're thinking in that timeline now, is I was taking the bus from my home in Markham, and I was taking the bus to the TTC bus, which is a special route that goes beyond Steeles and charges an extra fare, so it's $5, even though I live like maybe 2 kilometers north of Steeles. Basically that service comes every 30 minutes, that bus. So it's very, very, very much like a route that isn't very, very much commonly servicing us. And also like a lot of students at UTSC, because I talked to a lot of students about their experience on transit, they are coming from, you know, Durham region, York region, from other regions and municipalities to UTSC because of the strategic location of UTSC as being really, really close to these other municipalities. But despite being even closer to the campus than a lot of like other residents in Toronto, they have you know, they're paying twice as much fare. They're having, you know, like twice as long commutes, and then so I specifically talked to a few students about, I put out like an open call to students about like what they want to what issues they have. So if that's okay, I'd like to mention students' quotes from my conversations with them. So first of all, related to specifically issues that students are having in Scarborough, is that for example, that UTSC and Scarborough routes are really under prioritized in development compared to the West End and in general neighborhoods with more need for transit are not prioritized, which is something that Lubaba Gemma said. And she's a upper year student who's also in the Scarborough Campus Students Union. Another quote is that a lot of people mentioned about overcrowding during rush hour and inconsistent bus service. So what we're seeing is like schedules, like buses are not being able to meet their scheduled times because basically it leads to like bus bunching. So many people like Farzana Mullah and Dalraj Gill mentioned that overcrowding and inconsistent bus service really affects them. As well, the terribly long wait times, which is what Taqwa Musina mentioned. And really, like, Scarborough has 2 out of 3 of the highest bus ridership corridors in Toronto, yet these are not being turned into a rapid transit route, a bus rapid transit, or some sort of other transit route. And also the connections to other municipalities are not very good because of the extra fare that you have to pay and the fact that the service is so inconsistent. So yeah, those are the main issues.
Thanks, Kandeel. I mean, hopefully some of those routes will be turned into bus lanes, which Jamaal might speak a little bit about. But yeah, maybe we could go to Desmond next. Would you like to speak about some of the context? So issues that we're facing before the pandemic and how they've just been highlighted now.
Yeah, thank you, Sheila. I mean, for me, I totally echo James's sentiments about the chronic underfunding of our transit systems in general. This is the main context that we're all dealing with that is leading to so many of the other problems that we're seeing right now. I certainly want to highlight the underlying issue of discrimination on the transit system in Toronto, where it comes to Black riders being discriminated against. Ben Spur did an excellent report last year about how something like 18.5% of the tickets being given out on the TTC are to Black residents, which is a shockingly high number given the percentages of Black people in the city. And we knew this because, I mean, I wrote a whole book about white supremacy and anti-Black racism pervading all of our systems. So it wouldn't be a surprise to anyone who's paying attention that of course discrimination against Black people on the transit system would be higher. But that's not just Black people. It's people who are visibly identified as Muslim. It's people who have disabilities, including the visually impaired and people who use chairs. It's discrimination against homeless people or people who may look like they're living rough outside. That's just exacerbated in a time like this. I have been hearing reports from homeless advocates that police are walking up to people on the streets of Toronto and telling them that they can't be out on the street because they have to self-isolate. So this context of constantly just trying to move people out of public space, which includes the transit system, is only going to get worse in a time like this. The people who've been the historical targets of discrimination are going to face it equally and more so now. So I think that's a really important context for us to remember. When it comes to Wheel-Trans, which I mentioned before, Wheel-Trans has just recently assured people that they won't be using kind of more crowded situations on vehicles, that it'll kind of be a more personal space and a personal ride. That obviously, though, is going to affect the timelines of how rides get done, because there are only so many people who are able to carry out Wheel-Trans rides. And so a situation where Wheel-Trans has been underfunded for a long time is exacerbated in a scenario like this. And I really actually also want to name that the reason that other cities in this country have called for and implemented free transit and that Toronto won't is that we've been calling for free transit in the city of Toronto. And even though it is effectively free in some ways, like I can walk onto a bus in the back door in my community, and 90% of the time, the driver's probably not going to say anything to me. And right now, I don't really care because I don't think I should be paying for transit right now. However, the city of Toronto is just afraid that if it says free transit out of its mouth today, that's something that we're going to fight to preserve in the future. And they're damn right that we're going to fight to preserve it. We have to. So the context of people being stretched and being asked to choose, for example, as I mentioned, between food and getting to the places that they need to go, picking up their children, going to work, those things existed before. And we need to move forward in a way that addresses those things and doesn't just take care of an emergency situation to provide some relief, but says that we can never go back to the dire conditions that we had.
Yes, thank you so much. I wanted to quickly mention, you brought up Wheel-Trans in the context of cuts to Wheel-Trans, and one thing we might not talk a lot about today, but we're hoping to do some more online webinars and interviews, is the family of services, which is essentially everybody on Wheel-Trans is going to be reevaluated, and it's part of a cutting funding to Wheel-Trans. So just to flag that for a future conversation. Yeah.
Just one other really quick thing to note. I was speaking with Sarah Jama, who's an incredible disability justice advocate in Hamilton, and she was reminding me that the offered increase for people on ODSP during this pandemic is $50 a month. 50. So we really have to think about what the province of Ontario is expecting from people who are on disability supports right now in an emergency.
Yeah, thank you for that. I want to talk next to Carlos about some context. And, 1 year ago today, or, last spring, TTC workers were facing a threat of privatization because Premier Ford was planning to upload the transit system. And, we were afraid that that was going to mean privatization, higher fares on the subway. So that's part of the context for where we are today. And I'm wondering if you could talk about other pieces of context and the issues facing public transit workers.
Sure. Yes, and I do want to thank everyone, including TTCriders. You guys were exceptional in getting to all those subway stations and going to commissioner meetings and putting deputations after deputations. I really appreciate the help that you've done. Some of the issues that we've been dealing with has been the air quality in the subway. That's an issue that we've been pressing for a few years now, and it just came out that, yeah, we do have a problem in the subway with our air quality. Presto, I've put in deputation after deputation with Presto. This is a green box that we've paid $1.3 billion for, a little green box that doesn't take us from A to B. It doesn't take us anywhere. All it does is take your money. That's all it does. And I believe it's 5% of that money goes to the province, or goes to Metrolinx, which is mind-boggling in itself. So just think of the service and the vehicles and the transit that we could have in our city if we had that $1.3 billion put into our system and the city of Toronto and the TTC. Just think of that, and the operating costs and the increased service. And there's so much things we could have done with that money, instead of implementing a green box and then going around and asking people why you haven't paid. Meanwhile, their Presto card's not working, right? And so it's really, I think it's been a misuse of taxpayers' dollars. We've mentioned it. They first said that it was $10 million. We've been saying it's more than $10 million. We know it's probably over $100 million. And in the end, we were right. We've been right about the air quality. We've been right about Presto. Sometimes I do think that we need to work together. And I do think that we need to be at that table, whether it's the upload, whether it's air quality, whether it's Presto, whether it's any type of implementation of new strategies to improve transit. I do think ATU Local 1 month, we should be at that table and not find out about it half an hour before a press conference. There's other things like the 407 is a prime example of privatization. That money could have been used to pay for our transit. Privatization does not work. All it does is shift the blame from politicians to the private corporations. You can look anywhere in the world. Look at our own backyard, Ottawa, how that's been a disaster. It's been a complete disaster. Vancouver, London, Melbourne, Auckland, Chile. Actually, Chile, they started a whole revolution because of transit. So there are numerous examples of how privatization doesn't work. And it's really frustrating, but we have to keep plugging away, and we have to keep fighting for the citizens of Toronto and for everybody, that public transit is what we have to do to get through this. It's our future. It's what we do.
Thanks, Carlos. And maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong about Presto, but yeah, I think a lot of people don't know that it's a public-private partnership between Metrolinx and Accenture, which is a multinational corporation. Over 5% of every fare that we pay goes right to Presto. And it means, because it's a P3, a public-private partnership, TTC workers don't actually, when a Presto machine goes out of service, the whole streetcar has to be taken out of service. Am I right about that? That, a TTC worker is not the person to repair it.
Yes, or they get put in a queue to be repaired, but sometimes management will send them out because they want to meet service. So the streetcar could go out for a couple of days and not have Presto machines working. And, how can you expect a customer from the back? You're not getting a crowded vehicle now, but before this whole pandemic happened, how do you expect a customer from the back to, squish his way all the way up to the front to try and tap a Presto machine that's working because the one in the back is not working? And then you have fare enforcement officers that are coming on and saying, hey, you haven't paid your fare. Well, yeah, I tried, but it wasn't working at the time, and everyone's got a million things on their mind. And by the time the vehicle is empty where they can pay, they possibly forgot, right? So it's quite challenging for customers. The whole Presto thing, and in fairness to the TTC and the City of Toronto, they did not want Presto. This is something that was implemented by the provincial government.
That's right.
Yeah.
Thanks. And all these questions we can come back to as well at the end when we have more of a discussion together. I wanted to ask James about some context, and the LEAP has been campaigning for a Green New Deal. You did talk about this already a bit, but just wanted to know more about what a Green New Deal means for public transit.
Yeah, if it's okay, I'll just respond to a little bit of what Carlos said first, because I think he brought up a really good example of here in Ottawa, where I live, the transit system in terms of our new LRT system is, how do I not say clusterfuck? Just like awful in every sense of the word. Because like, if we're looking at it, it's just transit in Canada has been underfunded, and then costs have been then pushed down to consumers, to users, and then it's been privatized. With whether that's like the Presto card, or here in Ottawa, when we finally got our first kind of LRT system, it was supposed to open for the 150th anniversary of Canada, and we gave the contract to SNC-Lavalin, which I'm sure most people know because of their famous dealings now in Libya, where they were bribing officials. And it's just been unworkable. Like, trains can't work in the snow. If you hold the door open on one single car, the entire system shuts down, and it's just not operational. Trains are literally falling apart as they drive. And we've had workers here mention that there's no scheduling, it's just work of fiction. And so to respond to that, what was supposed to save the city a lot of money, of course, the city then has to rent buses from other cities to make up from that loss of capacity. And then we're seeing, in the middle of that, the push for privatization for the long term. So SNC-Lavalin won that $2 billion contract to build it, and then $2 billion to maintain it. And we just found out a couple months ago that they actually won a second contract to expand the LRT in Ottawa. And it was revealed that when the city reviewed their submission, that technically their bid failed. Like, when engineers and people looked at their bid, it was flawed so badly that they could not go on. Yet city staff and the lawyer recommended that they provide an exemption and approved this because it provided the lowest cost. And it got to the point where we found out later on that the lawyer actually represented SNC-Lavalin. So we're seeing the right and corporations push this classic neoliberalism in terms of underfunding, pushing costs to consumers, and then privatization. And what follows, as others have mentioned, is criminalization after that. And I think for us, we're looking at this moment to think about how do we respond. And the Green New Deal is an emerging framework about how do we combat these combined crises of climate change and inequality to actually articulate the world we want. It started in the US with AOC and other people, but it's quickly spread around the world. And the LEAP has been pushing it here to actually put forward a lot of the bold solutions that address climate change and put workers and working people at its heart. And for me, I have to put my hat off to Carlos, to your workers, because I think transit workers are really heroes, especially working right now. They allow the city to function, and without them, it would shut down. And when we're thinking about the world we want, right, if we think about a world that is just, that is sustainable, where everyone has access to the city, to go visit friends, to parks, for recreation, to art, nowhere is that more important than our transit system. And so for us, one thing we've been saying is that transit workers are actually climate workers. It's not just people we think of installing solar panels, but people who actually run the LRT systems, the buses, the trains, and help us actually fully enjoy the city. And those should be funded well. Those should be good paying unionized jobs and that have protections. And we should actually need to be funding that because this is the world we want. And so for the Green New Deal, it encompasses many different visions across sectors, but for transit, what that looks like for, well, for us and others as we're figuring out this process together is free transit. It's better funded transit. It's better paying jobs and protections for drivers. It's better suburban and rural transit. We talked to people across the country, many of them who would switch to transit instead of taking their car if they had any decent transit system around them, right? And we should be talking about things like public bus companies to restore the lack of service in the prairies, or high-speed rail across the country, and things like that. And I think if you really want a better world, transit is the ticket for that. And we need to invest in that and its workers.
Thanks, James. We're going to go to Jamaal next, but picking up on what you said about, a 30-year maintenance contract for SNC-Lavalin in Ottawa, that's coming down the pipe here in Toronto. The Eglinton Crosstown has a 30-year maintenance contract with Bombardier. And the other piece of context that, we've got from Premier Doug Ford is that the City of Toronto is now no longer owning and building new transit expansion. The province took that over last June with Bill 107. And that means that we're going to see new transit expansion built as public-private partnerships. So on that note, and maybe Jamaal will talk about rapid transit expansion in Scarborough too. I want to ask you about the issues facing Scarborough before this pandemic and how you're seeing that play out now.
Thanks, Sheila. So in Scarborough, about 42% of all TTC rides start and stop in Scarborough, and only about 26% are going downtown. And this is important because most people in Scarborough, in order to properly access rapid transit on the TTC, you have to take at least one, or in many cases, multiple buses to get where you're going, whether that's school, work, running errands, or whatever. As Kandeel mentioned, 2 of the top 3 of the busiest bus corridors are in Scarborough, and overall about 5 of the busiest 12 top bus corridors are in Scarborough. One of those, the Finch East, was identified as having issues with overcrowding. Before the pandemic, so the only rapid transit to be built in Scarborough over the past 30 years is the Eglinton Crosstown, and that's been under construction for about 9 years. The opening has been delayed until 2021. We expect that it's going to be pushed back even further now because of COVID-19. And it's important to note that while the Eglinton Crosstown is going into Scarborough, it only goes to Kennedy Station. The 3-stop Scarborough subway, which is what's being currently planned, only goes from Kennedy Station up to Lawrence East, up to Scarborough Town Centre, and then to McCowan and Shepherd. The subway, as it's currently estimated, is going to cost at least $5.5 billion. And we've been told that it should be open by 2030, which even before COVID-19, most experts considered that to be an unrealistic timeline. Now, because of all the available money for rapid transit in Scarborough is being used for the subway, there's no money to build the Eglinton East LRT, which would run from Kennedy along Eglinton East to the University of Toronto Scarborough campus, or the Shepherd East LRT, which would run from Shepherd and Don Mills Station to Shepherd and Morningside. If the city had just stuck to the original transit city plan, Scarborough would have had a 50-stop LRT network connecting 3 post-secondary campuses and 7 priority neighborhoods, and about 1 in 6 Scarborough residents could walk to a rapid transit stop. Under the current plan, only about 14 to 20,000 people could walk to one of the 3 subway stops, and many of those people already can walk to a subway stop because the current Scarborough subway plan is just covering the existing SRT route. So we're not actually adding a lot of new rapid transit to the At Scarborough Transit Action, one of our main concerns is the continuing viability of the Scarborough RT. So on an average weekday, about 35,000 people use the RT. It's over 30 years old. The technology is outdated and it's discontinued, which means it's very hard to repair it. If you go on the SRT, it's not uncommon to see tape holding things down. Currently, the city's budgeted in its TTC capital budget for 2020 about $18.2 million in order to help extend the lifespan of the SRT till 2030 when the subway is supposed to be up and running. Now, everybody who takes the SRT, or they should know at least, that there's no guarantee that the SRT won't break down either permanently before 2030 or inevitably during the winter like it usually does. I think the only people who don't know this are the politicians in Scarborough who generally don't take the TTC. When the SRT breaks down, the TTC is forced to use the shuttle buses, which are obviously slower because they operate in mixed traffic. In Scarborough, we really need to start, and this is one of the things Scarborough Transit Action is really pushing for, is that we really need to start planning for when the SRT inevitably breaks down, either temporarily or permanently. And that means buying extra buses, building the infrastructure for bus rapid transit routes, planning for signal priority along the routes, and making sure that the TTC actually has the capacity to store these extra buses that they're inevitably going to need.
Thanks so much, Jamaal. Yeah, I guess let's turn, I mean, we've been talking about it throughout our discussion, but let's turn to the future and, you know, what transit will look like once this pandemic is over and what we want it to look like. I wanted to start with Carlos. You know, what is the transit system that transit workers and the labor movement want to see, and what do you want to see from governments right now to make that happen?
Okay, well, we want a publicly funded transit system. We don't believe that a private company is gonna rescue transit riders. We want operating funding. We want everything done with the public consultation. We want the City of Toronto to run the TTC. We do believe that the Toronto Transit Commission should be run by the City of Toronto, and we want minimal participation from the province. Obviously, we do need a bailout. I know the TTC has been saying that they're losing $18 to $20 million a week. But once this is all over, it's going to go back to the overcrowding again. And like Jamaal said, we're going to need to have some extra buses. We're going to need to have some equipment. We can't wait around for things to break. We can't wait around for a 2030 subway that's going to be done, which we don't even know if it's going to be done now, and I think it's going to be delayed, especially if there's ever a reason to not build something. I think now is possibly the reason, because they're simply going to say they just can't afford it, right? They're going to, usually after pandemics like this, countries go into Great Depressions, and public transit decreases, and they have more reason to not build public transit. But at the end of the day, public transit is what's going to make a society function. It's going to make our city prosper, and I think public transit needs to be put on the forefront. I think that the LRT should be run by the TTC, not SNC-Lavalin or Bombardier, because we do have evidence of what's going on in Ottawa. And I think we need to start preparing for the RT and all other methods of transit to get people out of their cars. At the end of the day, we do get people out of their cars, but we have to get them there as quick as possible. And Bill 107 is concerning because the province is going to be building it. So who's going to be operating it? Who's going to be maintaining it? You can't have a group of people operating it and then a separate group of people maintaining it, because it ends up happening what happens with Metrolinx. They start pointing the finger at each other and nobody wants blame. We need the same people operating transit. We need the same people maintaining transit. We need to have our own system. We need to be able to repair vehicles. We need to rebuild engines. We need to do everything. Look at the people that are working today. It's not the traders. It's not the investors. It's not the lawyers. It's transit workers. It's healthcare workers. It's grocery clerks. It's police officers. We're a critical foundation of society, and I think they really need to spend money on public transit. That's what I think they need to be doing, and I'm more than willing to play a role in any future discussion about public transit in the city or even Ontario.
Thank you, Carlos.
No problem.
Maybe I'll ask Kandeel next about what is the future of transit that you would like to see.
So I really would like to see a safer system and a system that is funded as well. So really the first thing I think about is, and a lot of students also think about, is harassment on the TTC. As women, as people of color, Black, Indigenous youth, right? All of these people were taking transit, and right, we're facing harassment by, you know, sometimes operators, right? Because and sometimes other riders, but it's really just concerning because our commutes are so long already, and sometimes we're staying on campus for classes that end as late as 10 p.m. So, you know, what I would love to see is like, what I would love to have is the feeling of being safe on transit, and for even like for the fact that operators and bus drivers to even make us feel safer, because sometimes they exacerbate the issue. So in that sense as well is because of that criminalization of poverty, because of, you know, a lot of this stuff I study at school is, you know, like I'm studying urban social policy, transit policy, all of these things that now that the pandemic is playing out is directly showing us the gaps in these policies and funding and allocations. So what I'd love to see is a fully funded transit system that is fare free, because I don't want riders to be scapegoated for underfunding. I don't want riders to really like it, because that's really what's going on with the policing of people who are, you know, fare evaders, who, you know, with all these advertisements on transit, because that's really what's happening. So when we talk about TTC losing revenue, and all these systems losing revenue during this pandemic, I really do worry, and I really do worry that they're going to shift that blame onto riders and police riders even more for not having enough fare to pay for you know, or for not funding rapid transit in Scarborough, for example. So I really do see free transit as kind of like a direct, actionable thing, and that can happen to address poverty and to make our transit experience better as well, is something that I really, really do hope can happen. Because again, like I said, after this all plays out, I don't want the needle to not move. I would like to see us move forward, because what we see during this pandemic is all the gaps in you know, frequent service, overcrowding, in Presto not being accessible for everyone, in all of these things. And now I want us to move forward. I want to see accountability from our governments to fund transit, and to and also just to make it a better experience for riders.
Thank you, Kandeel. maybe I can go to Desmond next and ask you to talk about the future of public transit that you would like to see.
Sure. I really, really appreciate and echo Kandeel's last statements about fear of the already marginalized riders being scapegoated for the problems that politicians are actually creating and exacerbating. When we say in a moment like this that transit is an essential service and therefore the transit staff have to keep working, who is the transit system essential for? Who is it essential for? Is it essential for the riders? Because if it's an essential thing, like the police are essential, the fire department is essential, so I don't have to pay if there's a fire in my house. We need to get away from this notion that essential service is essential for the state or for the economy. It is not essential for the economy. It is essential for the riders, for the people of this province and for the people of the city of Toronto. So free transit funded through the province, assisted by the federal government, all levels of government helping out. That's obviously the model that we need to move to. When I think about these inspectors, there wouldn't be any need for any inspectors, obviously, on a fare-free system, nor would there be any need for Presto on a fare-free system. But I will say this in terms of Kandeel's other really good point about service. There are a lot of people who just need wayfinding support on the city's transit system. They need support to get where they're going, to know how to use the system, to know how to pay for the system. And the goons that are being hired to crack down on people right now could actually be helping assist and make the service on the TTC better. This idea that stopping people for $3 makes my experience as a rider better, it doesn't. It actually makes me more ashamed and afraid to ride the TTC. And so if we could actually repurpose some of the people who have been hired to hand out painful and punitive tickets to help people navigate the TTC and have a better customer service experience, I would very much like to see that. In terms of accessibility, we've seen John Tory in the city of Toronto spend extra money on things like road repair. So the Gardner's being repaired on an ongoing basis in the city of Toronto, and John Tory will say, I found an extra $1 million or $2 million. This goes to James's point about the kind of future, the green future that we want. Why are we finding money to speed up a road construction, but we can't speed up accessibility? And so many of the TTC stations in the city are still not accessible, and we can't get them there, but we can find extra money to repair a road. I just think our priorities are so out of whack when it comes to that. So I want to see a lot more expediting of funding for accessibility improvement. And then the last thing I'll say is, I really, to Carlos and to the members of 113 and to all the TTC workers, whether they're covered by that particular union or not, you are doing a service right now that is essential and that we desperately need. We're grateful to you. We thank you. But I also want to say at the same time, we cannot allow ourselves to be caught up in a party and a celebration when this is all over and forget that workers and people should never have been put in this situation to begin with. And my big fear about what's going to happen when we start to get back to life as normal is that the city is going to try and celebrate, oh, look at all these courageous individuals who helped us get through. They shouldn't have had to. Not without the supports that they needed to keep themselves safe, not without the distancing measures that they needed to keep the riders safe. This idea that people should have had to put themselves in harm's way and that now we're going to celebrate them rather than fixing the work conditions, we must be very careful because this is what I see coming. And so John Tory, Shelley Carroll, Jim Karagiannis, the other members of the TTC board, you know, I don't even mention people like Denzelman and Wong anymore because I feel like it's hopeless talking to some of the mayor's loyalists. But for those of you who call yourselves progressives and who are allowing fare inspectors to spread disease during a pandemic and allowing for transit to be paid during a pandemic when you say it's essential, we're going to have to deal with those politicians in the future because the change that we need is not coming from the people who are currently leading the Toronto Transit Commission.
Thank you, Desmond. I guess I want to ask Jamaal next about the future that you want to see on transit and for transit in Scarborough.
So I'd like to echo some of the earlier points that's made about fare-free transit and to really thank the workers for stepping up in this time. when a lot of people in the community need this support. Well, for Scarborough Transit Action, one of the things we'd like to see Toronto start building rapid transit in Scarborough is that it's affordable, equitable, and sustainable, and that it can be built in the shortest amount of time and help the greatest amount of people. So unfortunately, that doesn't describe the Scarborough subway expansion plan, and I'd just like to make two quick observations to demonstrate this point. First, as I said earlier, I work downtown, and I'm fortunate that I can do my job from home during the pandemic. So on a typical weekday, I spend 3 hours a day getting to and from work. I didn't realize until this pandemic just how much time I spent commuting on the TTC and how much time I actually wasted getting to work. And for some reason in Toronto, there's this mentality that around transit planning in Scarborough that it's okay to waste people's time in Scarborough. It's okay to promise to build rapid transit projects that don't actually make any sense, or it's okay to keep delaying these projects inevitably. The Scarborough subway, once it's up and running, is expected to save the average commuter about 12 minutes a day. So that's 6 minutes each way. That's not really a good investment for money. Most people before the Scarborough subway is built are going to be taking the buses, and most people after the Scarborough subway is built are going to be taking the buses. So we don't really see why this is a priority project for Scarborough. And to give this some context about how transit plays out in the community, so as was mentioned before, I sit on the board of TAIBU, which is a community health center in Malvern. And just speaking on behalf of myself, one of the benefits about the Eglinton East LRT is that it would directly stop at the clinic. So this would assist elderly, low income, and disabled patients that are seeking to access the services at TAIBU, and it would help the staff get to work on time. Because we're building the Scarborough subway, now there's no money to build the Eglinton East LRT, and that project has been pushed off indefinitely. Another instance of the subway plan taking over transit in Scarborough is how it affects our local businesses. So the subway plan doesn't provide rapid transit to any businesses or neighborhoods that are east of McAllen for the foreseeable future. And if you know the geography of Scarborough, it's quite large. So all of these businesses that aren't going to be connected to the rapid transit are going to be at a competitive disadvantage vis-a-vis other businesses that are connected to the TTC. And this is going to affect their competitiveness via how well they can attract employees, or just things like how likely as a customer you are to patronize their business. My second point that I'd just like to tie in, for Scarborough, we've been dealing with a public health crisis for a while that's not COVID-19, and that's the amount of pedestrian deaths. 13 out of 42 people killed in Toronto last year, pedestrians, were in Scarborough. That's about 31%, or about 1 in 3 pedestrian deaths are all in Scarborough. Their ages range from 17 to 89 years old. Now, I'm not suggesting that building an LRT network instead of a subway will be a panacea for lowering the number of pedestrian deaths, but I do know that if we build an above-ground LRT system instead of an underground subway, we'll have the opportunity to simultaneously redesign parts of the roads to make them safer for pedestrians and for drivers. We don't get that opportunity with the Scarborough subway. So these are some of the considerations I'd like us to start talking about when we talk about building transit in Scarborough. If Toronto is serious about addressing Scarborough's transit needs, it should allocate the $880 million that it's collected to build the Scarborough subway levy, which the province said it will take over the full funding of, and use that money to build the Eglinton East LRT instead, and prioritize building bus rapid transit routes along the busiest corridors in Scarborough. Thanks.
Thanks, Jamaal. Yeah, let's hear from James last. I want to ask you about what governments need to do to both bail out transit right now and to fund it in the long term. And I'm wondering if you could also talk about the bailout that's happened for the oil and gas industry, and to put it in that context.
Thank you. Yeah, so just a note, I don't think the oil and gas bailout has already happened. People are talking about a potential $15 billion bailout. I mean, we know how these things go, so they're going to get something. So you're not far off the mark. We're waiting to see if they'll actually get a full $15 billion handout. But Naomi Klein, the founder of The Leap, is fond of quoting Milton Friedman, this kind of classic architect of neoliberalism, who says that only a crisis creates real change. And the change then that happens depends on the ideas that are lying around. And when we think about that, if you look around, you realize that the right actually never lets a good crisis go to waste. In fact, they're already moving to dismantle the transit systems and privatize, and to have a sort of like downloading of costs onto individuals, whether that's like Lyft or Uber or ride sharing. I learned recently that Innisfil, Ontario, actually now uses Uber to subsidize that instead of expanding bus routes. And so after this crisis, we could see a further change of that. And so our job on the left, or as progressives, is to reimagine the world we want in this moment of crisis, because everything is on the table. We actually see government spending an unprecedented amount of money. You know, you've got the finance minister saying there's no cap on the amount of spending they'll do to get out of this. You've got the governor of the Bank of Canada saying there's no theoretical limit to what they're willing to spend. And in this moment of crisis, everything's possible. And so here at The Leap, we're articulating what we call a people's bailout. That is a rescue plan for people and the planet that actually invests in workers, invests in communities and public services, and helps get us to the world we want. And we're thinking about it in terms of 3 phases. Immediate measures to respond to the crisis, then to help us recover, and then finally to reimagine our society. And we think all of them have to happen at once, but just to get a sense of like the short, medium, and long term. So for transit, what we're pushing for is to respond to the crisis, automatically make transit free, expand accessibility, put in elevators in systems, actually expand routes and service. And then to help us recover, make it free all the time, expand routes and service, especially in suburban areas, build new stations. And then if we think about reimagining it, what is the world we actually need? And I would say that it's high-speed rail across the country, train routes beyond the normal east to west, and a public bus company, right? In my past work, both with the Canadian Union of Postal Workers and The Leap, we were working with a group of workers in Oshawa when General Motors shut down its plant there. Now, General Motors had received about $3 billion in bailouts over the past few years. And then last year, they announced they were taking the plant, one of the largest in North America, and moving it to Mexico. And doing that through 15,000 people out of work, 5,000 direct, 10,000 indirect. So we came up with a plan to actually nationalize the plant and retool it to make electric vehicles and buses. And then those vehicles could first service Canada Post, who's got the largest vehicle fleet in the country. And what we found was that doing that, you could actually spend under $2 billion and create 13,000 jobs and actually break even in a couple years. Although I would advocate that we shouldn't pay a single cent for it because they still owe us money from the bailout. Or we look at things like Bombardier, which won a huge bailout in 2017 of $372 million. And then immediately after, they turned around and laid off 5,000 people and gave a $32 million bonus to their executives. Or we have New Flyer, a huge world-leading manufacturer of electric buses in Winnipeg. And New Flyer actually used to be a provincial crown corporation owned by the Manitoba government until 1986 when they sold it off. Now they're laying off employees in the middle of the crisis, and they're asking for bailouts. And so I think what we need to talk about is actually nationalizing these companies, and you can give them money if you want, but my approach would be to run them out of town with pitchforks and take back what's ours, and actually put these people to work to create more good, well-paying unionized jobs, to create high-speed rail, to create electric buses, to have a public bus route in the prairies since Greyhound closed out, and to think about how do we actually build the transit we need. So The Leap is pushing for this idea of a people's bailout in 3 phases: to respond, to recover, and to reimagine our society in the middle of this crisis. And so we're going to be developing it in the next couple of weeks and putting forward this idea of the world we want and how to get there. And I think we're all in agreement that like the way we use transit and the way we depend on cars in our cities needs to change. And for that to change, transit actually needs to be more attractive than private vehicle ownership and private vehicle use. And I think we get there by expanding public transit, expanding routes and service, making it so convenient and friendly and comfortable and accessible for everyone, and pushing for it, both as union members and as the public. For me, I think the strategy that most excites me is when members in different unions actually put these demands on the bargaining table, and then members in the community support them. They initiate mass protests, sit-ins, strikes, or when ATU goes on strike, the public is there. And I think we saw that with my old work in the Postal Workers Union when CUPW actually got locked out, because they were articulating this vision called delivering community power, which I don't have time to get into now, but like forward thinking, equitable, sustainable. We actually had community members lining up to shut down post office plants, Canada Post plants for them and getting arrested. And I think that's sort of like deep union community collaboration in favor of the vision we want. The people's bailout is how we win.
Thanks, James. I think we'll probably wrap up soon because we don't have questions from people, but I want to make a quick comment, and at the risk of dampening the mood after your really inspiring vision for the future, I just think, and talking about the idea of a bailout, the TTC will need a bailout from the provincial government and federal government, but it can't be a one-time bailout. It has to be long-term. They need to start investing in operations funding for transit all across the country. And to Desmond's point about kind of what happens next and being a bit worried about what we're going to see after this is over, the TTC has never had a ridership decline like this, but they have had recessions in the past. And in the 90s, after a ridership decline after a recession, there was a vicious cycle of fare hikes and service cuts to deal with it. And that is not the way to gain more riders or to fix our public transit system. So we'll need a bailout now, but also a shift in how transit is funded in the future. I wanted to just offer, if people have any responses or anything they'd like to say to each other, we could do that now. But I think maybe while you think about that, I just wanted, I think Candace has put up a slide about some calls to action. There's a petition to refund the March Metro Pass that people didn't use for 2 weeks. There's a petition to stand with Canadian transit workers and demand the highest level of funding for public transit agencies across the country right now. And we have an open letter that highlights, a lot of the demands we've talked about now. Stop enforcing fares, make transit fare free during the pandemic, make sure that all workers and riders are protected. So yeah, any last comments or thoughts people would like to share?
I just wanted to say that I wanted to actually share a little anecdote of the last time I rode a TTC bus. I take the 63 Ossington bus a lot in the kind of St. Clair and Oakwood area. And I had a conversation with two drivers saying that this push for free fares and for the end of transit inspection is something that I really wanted to see the union take up with riders. And at first, these two drivers were very defensive, quite frankly, and hesitant of me raising this to them and saying, this is not actually our problem. We're actually fighting for masks for ourselves as drivers. And I said to them, well, as a rider who's not part of your union, I support you having a mask if that's what you need in order to be safe, but I need you to support us as well. In other cities where we've seen strife and unaffordable transit fares and increasing hardship on the rider, unions and the riders have actually gotten together to organize things like fare strikes. And I just want to say to Carlos, as a representative, we need you, and I think you need us, and we have to find ways to work together, because as I was mentioning before, there's no individual or sequestered interest when it comes to the future of transit, and certainly when it comes to getting through this pandemic. What's good for some of us is going to be good for all of us. So as a rider, I support the TTC staff in being able to operate safely right now, and we need the support of the union to say, what about the riders' safety? Not just about about our safety. Let's work together going forward so that our voices are louder and it's harder to ignore that push that we all need.
Totally, we're definitely all in this together. And I think, throughout the panel, we've talked about how, this has just highlighted the need for workers' rights for everyone, for publicly funded services for everyone. Is there anyone else who wants to make any last comments?
Yeah, I'll just say, yeah, I agree with Desmond, and I appreciate the support. We do have to work together. We have been working together, and you know, my phone is always open for a conversation with you, Desmond, or James, or Kandeel, Shelagh. We talk all the time. I appreciate everything that you're doing. Going forward, we could definitely set up some discussion with respect to where you want to go next steps, and what challenges are we're facing as passengers, customers, employees, everyone going forward. So I'm definitely open for conversation.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks to everybody for making the time today, sharing your experiences and your ideas. I think, unless there's anybody who wants to make another comment.
I just wanted to make a comment. I really want to thank everyone for all the valuable insight. And as a student of, like, you know, like cities and policy, it's really, really valuable to me to just, and it's really, I'm really honored to be a part of this conversation. And I just really, speaking of unions, speaking as someone in a student union, I really do as well would love to increase that collaboration, increase that solidarity between unions and transit workers who do such valuable work for us, and transit riders. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Shelagh, and TTCriders too. Thank you so much for organizing and hosting along with ATU.
Thanks, and thanks to the LEAP for co-hosting the event. And maybe just one last plug is to make sure to follow TTCriders on social media, because we want to continue having conversations throughout this pandemic about how to stay safe, but also imagining the future we want and how we can get there. So thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.